I do now want to pivot to Prime Minister Netanyahu. Over the weekend, he said that Israel is entering the second phase of this war and it's going to be long and difficult. What's your reaction to that?
Um, so I think a lot of Israelis were waiting to find out when this ground operation would begin, and there were a few things that happened before, which is first there was all sorts of targets struck by air, and intelligence was being gathered. I think it's understandable that it would take a few weeks to get ready, and my understanding is that after 9/11, it took the U.S. longer to invade Afghanistan, though that's on the other side of the world, but it takes time. So now the ground invasion has started, and I think everyone knows that it's not easy to just it's not a one and done. You're not going to just go in there and leave after a few days and then you'll be rid of Hamas. I mean, if it was easy to get rid of Hamas, Israel would have done it already, right? If we wouldn't have waited until the absolute worst case nightmare scenario before we went in and did it. So, Israelis unfortunately have some experience with long wars, including the first war in Lebanon in the 1980s. And it looks like we might experience something like that again.
And what's the sentiment around Netanyahu specifically? Are people rallying around him, supporting him? Because I know you said that this was a unifying moment for your country earlier, or are people kind of putting the blame on him?
Yeah, I think that there are sort of two things going on, which is that the country, the maybe civilians isn't the right word, but the civil sort of efforts of everyday Israelis have been very, very uniting. And across all sectors of society, you see Haredi, ultra-Orthodox men, now signing up to enlist in the army in droves, even though they are exempted from the mandatory draft in Israel. Thousands of them in the past few weeks have signed up. And you see all kinds of, there were groups that were protesting against the government. I'm sure you know that this year there were mass protests, weekly protests in Israel, and they have used their very impressive logistical capabilities to help the families of hostages and the families of people who were killed and injured in the Hamas attack. So you really see the society uniting. At the same time, polling shows that 86% of Israelis blame Netanyahu, or at least think he is at fault here. I don't remember the exact wording of the question, and I think there's a sense, and this is something that I hear again and again in people interviewed on the radio, on TV, and things like that, where they just feel that the government failed, and so we, the people, have to step up and do things for ourselves. And that's not a good situation. And I think that, the leadership is going to have to pay for that in one way or another. I hear more and more voices calling for Netanyahu to resign. I don't think that it's reached a point where there is a serious discussion of that happening right now in the very beginning of this war that Netanyahu would resign. But I think, there have been many, many times when people have said Netanyahu's days are numbered and they were wrong. I have a feeling that this time the people saying that will be right.
Do you think his days are numbered? Like, how long are his days numbered? I guess I would ask. You said that the leadership will pay for this, but will the people of Israel hold off on that until the war is more under control?
I think so. Yeah. This might be a very long war. So I don't know that it'll wait to the end of the war, but I think that we are still in the beginning. I mean, just like you quoted Netanyahu as saying, and Israelis are going to have patience and going to have to continue being united on the home front for a while. That being said, for the past 50 years, after every war in Israel, there has been an official commission of inquiry, and there have been people who have had to resign over, not being prepared for the war or how they conducted themselves during the war. And I don't expect this to be any different, because I think Israelis across the political spectrum are disappointed and angry in how this government conducted itself. And by the way, also its predecessors. I mean, Netanyahu has been prime minister for most of basically since 2009, with the exception of a year and a half, right? But even in that year and a half, they didn't change the way they looked at Hamas. And there's also a long line of defense ministers and chiefs of staff of the IDF who all had the same policy. So, we're talking about Netanyahu. He's the top of the pyramid and he has to take responsibility. But there are a lot of people who were wrong here.